Hello, and greetings from the World Economic Forum. I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the CEO of The Atlantic. We're about to have what I assume and hope will be a fascinating conversation about restoring trust in tech. We have lots to talk about. I'm joined by Sebastian Niles. He is the President and Chief Legal Officer of Salesforce. Hello, Sebastian. How are you this fine day?
Hello, excited to be here. Thank you.
And Helena Laurent. She is the Director General of Consumers International based in Switzerland. Greetings. How are you, Helena?
Great to be here. Thank
Great.
you, Nick.
I'm really happy to have you both here because I think we're going to talk about some good stuff. Helena, I'm going to start with you.
Awesome.
What are the biggest problems that we need to solve in AI? Just give me a list of what you think the biggest problems are, and then Sebastian can respond, and we'll just get right into it.
I love it. And Nick, you've given me a great question because we've literally just asked all of our members around the world. So let me tell you who our members are first.
Great.
So you can give this sort of reliability and credibility. Consumer advocacy, best thing you have probably never heard of, but all around the world there are amazing organizations that are just standing up for consumer rights. Consumer Reports here in the US, Choice in Australia, Which in the UK. These are all of our members, and if you think of that force combined, that's a great set of insight into what people everywhere, day in, day out, are experiencing, and then we can come and share that insight in places like this.
Wonderful.
And we literally have just asked them, what do you think are the things that need to be solved for? So this is a perfect conversation. In general, the first thing I'd say is that there's general positivity. Okay, I mean, we're an NGO. We're
Positivity about AI.
About AI, yeah. So, in general, consumers want access to new technology. I mean, in general, you want progress and innovation.
They want access to it, or they think it's making the world better and they're excited?
They think it could have, and I will read, AI will have a positive impact.
Will have.
Isn't that incredible?
Do they think is having?
Right, so yeah,
Present tense, positive or not positive?
And within that,
okay.
So financial services, retail, health.
Yep.
Okay, now whether we've bought the hype, I don't know. Absolutely, we need certain areas to be improved fast and with urgency and with real attention. So now I'll get to your list, okay?
Great.
So here's the list. Privacy, you cannot do this unless we really know how our data is being used, unless we have some level of control over that. It's very obvious that our data is out there and is beyond our control. Safety, and safety means a variety of things that we can get into. The way in which we get information and how we know, is this AI or is this something else? The way in which the consumer information is changed. The way in which consumers who are exposed or who are in greater situations of vulnerability, they need special attention. In the majority of cases, the world treats consumers as if we are all just rational, human beings who have access to all of the information and can use it, in perfectly, straightforward ways. We are not. So thinking through those cases and redress. That's one of the biggest areas. Okay, we'll be interested and sort of lean into generative AI. We'll perhaps accept that some of this will not be quite perfect, but when things go wrong, we need to know that we will get redress, that somebody will take responsibility, and that we can make this work for us. Now I can go into each one of those, and there are all sorts of edge cases, but those are the responses.
We will go into each of those. I think we should definitely do that. We have a good bit of time here. By the way, I should have noted at the very beginning that if you would like to rage tweet or engage calmly and pleasantly, please use the hashtag SDIM25. Sebastian, you've just listened to Helena lay out what she thinks the most important issues are. Do you roughly agree from a businessman's perspective that these are the key issues to solve in order to get people feeling good about AI? Your company is clearly using AI. You're at the frontier. You would like people to feel good about it. Is this the right queue of issues?
No, look, I love the way you posed the question. What are the biggest problems to solve with AI? I suppose, as you said, at Salesforce, we have our agent force, agentic AI, first, of its kind platform, leading with trust. And yet, I think back to when I was in law school and I had a bad habit of fighting the hypothetical. I don't think those are the biggest problems to solve. I come at it more as what are the biggest problems to solve for business, for society, for consumers. So, for example, how do governments connect with their citizens and constituents in a whole new way? How do businesses connect with their customers in a whole new way to meet rising expectations? How do organizations and governments and just worldwide, small businesses, large enterprises, nonprofits, grapple with how do you do more with less? How do you address long-standing shortfalls in capacity, right? How do you grow in scale in an extremely competitive, complicated environment? How do you address long-standing gaps, issues, divides in society? And because I come at it more from that, because I believe the role of the private sector in business fundamentally is to solve the problems of society, of other businesses, of communities, sort of each other. Those kinds of problems are the ones that we must use, whether it's agentic, autonomous AI, whether it's other forms of artificial intelligence. Those are the problems that we have to be tackling, and AI is a piece of that.
But aren't Helena's problems upstream of your problems, right? Don't we need to have people comfortable with privacy, have people comfortable with safety, have them know how to use their computers before government can connect with the citizens?
Yes, you have to. It goes to a point, Helena, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. So our view at Salesforce is that trust becomes a form of propulsion for innovation. That trust and innovation aren't at odds, precisely for the reasons that you said. If you bring trust into the technology lifecycle at the start, whether it's privacy by design, whether it's how do we ensure accuracy, relevancy, utility, you're going to drive adoption. And without widespread adoption of these technologies, in order to get to the world we envision, which is humans with AI driving stakeholder success, humans and agents working together, you won't get the adoptions that's needed to address those long-standing biggest problems and achieve the opportunity.
All right, so Helena, Sebastian has kind of agreed that your list of problems is properly placed upstream of his list of problems. Is his list of problems the proper list downstream of yours? Like, do you feel like the outcome you want for AI is once we solve privacy, transparency, redress, all that then we want Sebastian's list?
Right now, you've got consumers deeply concerned about the cost of living, attacked by scams. They are really worried about rising food prices, renewable energy. They are concerned about the state of the world. So when I talk about, AI might help solve some of these things in certain areas, it's in that context. So it needs to, I completely agree, there's an opportunity to solve for this. But if we are not doing it whilst addressing these problems, you are going to see an exacerbation of the downside of all of this. So if you take, for example, fintech or digital finance, right? You've got a more brittle system right now where consumers are leaning in. You want more. You've got 76% of the world is banked. You've got a lot more who need to be banked. Within that, though, people who are experiencing that digital finance doesn't work for them. And a majority of us have experienced a scam. The majority of us don't report the scam. Very few of us ever get redress from a scam. So AI, is likely to then exacerbate that and worsen the problem, right? So yes, solving for and looking at those problems, but they're here with us now. AI is here with us now. These problems are here with us now, and many of those can be addressed if we collectively look at what you call the upstream. I think there's an in-between space, though, which is innovation with consumer protection involved. It's sort of this innovation doesn't need to happen divorced of people. If you work on ways in which, for example, consumer advocates could be involved in the design and the development, if some of the rules of the road take into account what people are experiencing, we might have we'll get there faster. Does that make any sense?
But that seems like it's a question. I'm just the moderator. I don't have any opinions or independent thoughts.
Fair.
Sebastian, so you build frontier AI models at your company. Do you take into account all the things that Helena says you should be taking into account? And if you do, why does she seem to think you don't?
I love how you put words into her mouth that she thinks that we don't.
She put words into your mouth in her answer where she's like, we agree, right? And then she moved on.
So let me.
We're all doing the same trick.
Let's address the topic.
I won't do that again.
No. I think the points you raise are critical, and it's actually why at Salesforce, number one, our number one core value, we have 5. Our number one core value is trust. And we even think of that like we have other values: customer success, innovation, the like. We believe that in cybersecurity, there's a term called shift left, which is how do you bring cybersecurity at the outset? Well, similarly, we think all of these issues of privacy, by design, how do you think of risk and ethics? How do you, when you think of autonomous AI, so agent force, right? We think of what is an agent, right? An agent working with humans, and it's going to have like 5 elements, right? It's going to be what's the role, right? What's the job that they're doing kind of with the human teams? It's what's the data, the information they're going to have access to. It'll be, what's the tasks, right? What capabilities do they have? It's going to be what's the guardrails? Mm-hmm. What are they not supposed to be? And And then there's channels. Where are they going, to work? And so that's why, whether it's our Office of Ethical Humane Use of Technology, we were the first company to create that kind of office to grapple with these issues. When we think of security, I think the reason, though, why for us it's almost in a way like more natural, though it's a very deliberate business model and our set of principles, because our customers, right, expect that. Our customers, whether it's the largest enterprises, whether it's governments, whether it's businesses, whether it's nonprofits or whatnot, have a very high standard around these issues: security, privacy, access controls, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but the broader concepts of governance, of guardrails, of guidance to tackle these types of downside considerations that will delay adoption, that will hinder innovation, and ultimately just not enable the trust in tech that is so critical, right, to getting all the upsides.
This is super interesting because if I think about Helena's initial list, there are a couple of them that are completely in sync with your incentives, like privacy, right? And in fact, when I use AI, I feel like privacy is not that big an issue. I feel like the companies have done a pretty good job. I haven't seen examples. And obviously, like, we have to be very careful as a company about our customers' private data. So I feel like there's a real incentive. Safety, similar incentives. I mean, the big AI companies have an incentive to move really fast. Maybe put safety to the side. Redress and transparency are pretty interesting. Those are 2 where I don't think the companies have similar incentives. And so for the big companies to properly address, redress and transparency, they would have to, act a little bit against their economic interests. Is that a fair read, that some of these items on her list totally align, some it's a little more complicated and you have to make different choices?
Can I add representation onto that as well?
Yeah.
You're doing great with the list, so if we can add another one.
I'm thinking of your answer in 2 different ways. One for Salesforce in particular versus the broader industry. For us in particular, our considered approach is very aligned. So we have decided we're going to have acceptable use policies. We're going to have approaches that prioritize transparency. We developed, a concept, a framework around, Agentforce trusted agentics, which is how do you really grapple with ensuring customers have control, have choice, have compliance, right, sort of on these sets of issues. Privacy, look, we were one of the first companies to actually call, even here in the US and elsewhere, we need a common sense privacy set of laws and regulation. As for the broader industry, I think it sort of depends maybe what are the priorities. We try to take a very long-term oriented approach. And again, we're not a consumer, right, company in sort of the traditional sense, right? We're serving the needs, right, of organizations, of businesses, of governments, and the like.
How do you feel about that answer, Helena?
I think number one, we haven't talked about the role of government and regulation. I know in all of this, where's the playing field that sets us all up? One of the pieces of feedback from the folks, from our members in 115 countries is, even in high-income countries, we haven't got the policy frameworks right yet for AI, and that's even more so in low and middle income countries. I think the figure is about that. The estimate that we have is about 12% of countries have any kind of sort of legislative body or framework, really. So, and then a lot of the frameworks that you're seeing around AI come from, high-income countries, a lot of what's going on. So there's an entire playing field that we can investigate. And I think we were talking earlier, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many policies and approaches in place that can be brought from the past. But frankly, consumer protection is often not considered. Things like redress don't get factored in. So what number one is, I think there's a missing piece of the equation. If you haven't got the playing field right, how are we supposed to have the right game or decide what game we're playing in the first place?
Right, we don't have the playing field, so how do we set the rules? We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, and then the second bit is the word trust comes up a lot. For us, it's be trustworthy, right? And so you talked a lot about the way, and this is what you want to see, that the companies that are engaged in this are taking every step, not just to expect trust, not just to expect that trust will be built, but to be trustworthy, to be worthy of that trust in the first place. So your points about, let's look at the criteria we use, let's update them on a regular basis, let's think about these consumer issues, that is incredibly important. I think the reason I sort of pinpoint redress and representation is that those always get left behind, and those are the places where you really will build trust, and where you will find the innovation. Back to what we want to build together, right? Those opportunities. That comes through the feedback loops and the conversations about, well, what does digital finance really look like when it works, when we're trying to get remittances, when when we unlock that together through tech.
Let's talk about government regulation. Sebastian, why don't we start with you? You not only are president of Salesforce, but you are a lawyer. You used to work at Wachtell Lipton, meaning that you surely now work fewer hours a week as president of Salesforce than you used to work at your law firm. What to you is the ideal regulatory framework for AI? Obviously that's hard because there are 15 different layers to it, but what country, region, or state has gotten closest to it?
Oh, wow. No, great questions. A couple of responses, including to weave in some of your critical points. So, we recently published a global AI readiness index where we said, okay, let's look globally and across the different countries and contexts and think about, okay, what does readiness mean? Who's also able to take readiness to real results? And overall, kind of what's the relevant sort of sets of frameworks? From that legal perspective, the rule of law is an important principle, right? That generally actually enables stability, certainty, effectiveness. You also need to think about, and look, Europe is grappling with this relative to the US and other, sort of jurisdictions of, do you have a regulatory system that is fundamentally seeking to support and enhance responsible innovation? And so, is it risk-based? Is it tailored around different sets of use cases? Does it think about the different considerations, for example, for small to medium-sized businesses who, we're seeing double-digit growth, right, in that area. And that's like an area where they really need and can benefit so much from AI sets of technologies. Do you also have elements around in regions where you don't necessarily have a long-standing approach from the private sector and the like to prioritize privacy, security, right? These other sort of sets of elements. Okay, are there areas where you need the government to more step in with some sharper laws, and frameworks around it? Look, I think the reality is, it is not a coincidence that the U.S. is the global leader around AI development, around AI adoption, around positive sort of sets of AI impact. There's also a lot that can be learned across different jurisdictions.
You mean it's not a surprise because
of
naturally flows from our regulatory framework?
We're very pro-innovation. We're trying, I think, to grapple with these set of issues. We're also, I was in Singapore this summer, and Singapore had this very thoughtful approach of how do you balance if you regulate too deeply, too soon, too broadly, too one-size-fits-all, you're not going to be able to have technology that lets a particular jurisdiction leapfrog and become, competitive. And just that mindset of how do you weigh right, the upsides against, the risk set of issues in a context where now with AI, it is coming from the private sector. It used to be, right, it's the universities, right, that sort of are developing all this. Now you just need new forms of partnership between governments, the private sector, educational institutions, civil society, and law has to be something, because I believe that AI fundamentally is transformative to solve and address long-standing, very serious issues for businesses, for civil society, for communities. You need legal and regulatory frameworks that will propel the right kind of responsible development, deployment, and adoption, rather than the idea that, okay, this is an area where we're just not going to have AI in a particular country or a particular community, because that's going to put folks way far behind when you think of long-term prosperity, inclusion, and effectiveness.
Though it is interesting that the two countries that are going the fastest are the United States and China. The United States, where we have a very low, light-touch regulatory environment, and China, where you have state-picked winners, right? You have very different systems are leading to incredible success, and weirdly, in fact, China's is leading to success in open models, right? They've just surpassed us or about to surpass us in total downloads in open source AI models. So there are different forms of regulation that can lead to success.
Different forms actually of just societal structures and systems, right? So I'm not sure if the key difference there is a legal or regulatory one, right? And I also think your comment just prompted me to have a slightly different view than what I said before. See, how do you get to widespread adoption? So when I was in France over the summer, there they had issued a report that France was very concerned about, which was very low adoption.
Yeah.
And these are all very serious, thoughtful people. And I think that's how this has evolved from the, oh, what if, to the, oh, what do we do now, to more of the, wow, what can we do now? And yes, what should we do now, from the lens of guardrails, governance, and guidance. Yeah. And I think you need harmonization, right? You need interoperability. You need all those sets of items. And just lastly is, your comments around redress. I think that's where different countries, different regions, state, local, different kind of context about what is the baseline law. So in the U.S. and other countries, civil law societies in the U.S., there are very long-standing principles that address elements of shared responsibility between, say, companies and their customers, the value chain, negligence. How do you drive the right type of behavior by having reasonable duties of care and standards of care, and how should that apply to AI and different sets of items? One quick point on transparency, to your point, is like when we think of Agentforce, right? Agentforce, agentic sort of AI items, we said, hold on, we need a command center that basically is going to give folks that observability, transparency, the auditability, right? What's really going on in these systems of humans working with AI and agents, so that you can either intervene or you can make sure the human teams being, in a way sort of activated and aware and able to engage, whether it's with the customer, whether it's sort of on internal, sets of items. And that kind of transparency on the ground, right, in the flow of work and impact, ends up becoming the big unlock.
I definitely want to talk about that, but before we do that, Helen, I want to bring you to this larger regulatory question and ask you the same question I asked Sebastian. Who's getting it right, regulation-wise?
We would look at the way in which consumer protection is brought into the picture, into policy, and that covers all different types of topic. It's not just in tech, it's into food systems, it's into energy, it's sort of, all of these things. Consumer policy and consumer protection is a pretty recent phenomenon, weirdly enough.
But you think that the key is who has a good consumer protection regime that can be applied to AI, or is it just who has the best consumer protection regime, and that will likely lead to the best AI protections as well?
No, who starts with the person? Who starts not with the tech, but also with how does this work for the person on the ground? Obviously, this is related to products or services that impact the consumer. There's a whole, AI for manufacturing, et cetera. It's a different animal. But if you, what you are looking for, and each jurisdiction, each experience of each consumer advocate is totally different. Zimbabwe only introduced Consumer Protection Act in 2019.
It wasn't really a key focus of Mugabe.
There are all sorts of evolutionary approaches here, and And the piece that you really want to make sure is don't lose the person in developing the technology.
So who's doing the best work with that?
I think when you look, consumer protection is split and divided into so many different places. That's part of the problem. I think that's why we end up forgetting the person as we move forward. That's an interesting question in its own right. I think if you look at an example of, for example, the UK and what's happening there with digital finance, or Malaysia, where they are starting to say, let's think about a duty of care. 2, let's think about a space where we consider what are called vulnerable consumers, which I think is a really poor term, but you actually have a way of thinking about consumers who may have a different experience of the marketplace, and how we sort of really think about that and start from their experience. I think you're right. There are all sorts of different directions that you could take with this, but it would be interesting to look at the principles around this, and even then the best frameworks and models, if you compare and contrast across, always are low on representation, and that's the missing piece in all of this. You're never going to design the right sort of the most exciting innovations if we're not listening and keeping that going.
Wait, you will never design the best regulations if you're not listening?
You'll never design the best innovation, the best outcome, the best consumer welfare, the best sort of resilience for us, the best system that actually delivers a new product or a new service.
Let's stay on this law topic, because this is very interesting. So let's take the US. The bedrock elements, so for example, we do have certain privacy, HIPAA, we have laws, right, in regulated industries. And when you think of AI as applied to regulated industries, it's actually, okay, how do you add this, agentic layer, augmentation layer, as we think of it, to highly regulated companies and businesses? Why are they highly regulated? Because the stakes, right, are so high. But the way you take a trust-first approach there is often, okay, work within that established structure, protect that data, right, in at least as, sort of significant way as what was outlined, sure, in a pre-AI world. And you can kind of actually take that similar set of concept, and then you see the issues with, the EU AI Act, right, which, in a sense was very bold, trying to drive sort of frameworks around this, different sets of, risk, AI. And yet, this summer, you then have European companies, right, who have millions of customers and consumers and nonprofits actually saying, uh-oh, this legal framework, and again, this is coming from the folks, it's not sort of the American companies or sort of the Europeans saying, wait, if this is what happens, you end up potentially with a balkanized approach where the leaders in developing this technology may not be able to make the investments and have the sort of business models that will deploy the same high quality technology in that region that has a regulatory framework that people aren't really sure how would you in practice implement it to build trust. And that's where you have to, I think the concept, the paradigm shift has shifted more to how do you get the right frameworks in place to drive adoption, use, and rapid responsible deployment, rather than hey, let's stop the development or use of this technology.
Are you making the argument that EU overregulation will prevent development of AI in Europe? Or it sounded to me kind of an interesting twist on that, which is potential overregulation in the EU will prevent the big companies from deploying models that have the highest benefits for the citizens in the EU?
So it's that last piece, which as you try, we have been very early on in Europe, right? And the asks we hear from customers is, look, we want, right, your best technology.
Right.
And then there becomes this element of how do you deal with regulations if it is...
But you can't give them your best technology because, I don't know, it doesn't meet transparency requirements?
This is what, for us, we find ways to make sure we're giving, right, sort of everyone the benefit of things. But the European companies were raising the issue of they're not going to be able to get all the same sets of technology, as well as how do you get, raise the champion. So Mistral, for example, we're an investor in Mistral, right? And that's this complicated or really interesting question of the technology becomes less available to the citizens, to the consumers, to the constituents, if the regulatory framework is one that isn't enabling and encouraging companies, whoever have the best technology, to deploy it in that region.
Helena, do you feel like this is a solid argument that you agree with, or do you feel like this is something that folks from America are often saying about Europe and it's a little misguided?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, yes, reporting is onerous, and there is a lot of reporting which you need to do a lot of work to be able to put the data on the table. But when you dig into what is being reported on and what that could unlock and what it actually means, within some of that, there is some great stuff about, okay, well, how do I engage with consumers and how do I really sort of build trust with them on the topics you're talking about? So I wonder whether there's something about the onerousness of reporting and sort of that period in time when we're learning how to find that data and how to put it in place, and there's just difficulty to sort of pinpoint, versus the actual, doing this will be really powerful. I don't want to sort of land on, we're a global organization, so there are different ways of doing things, but the what's being asked for, and if we're trying to combat greenwashing, for example, or if we're trying to understand, well, how do I as a consumer understand what's going on, it is a first start for transparency. And that is what...
Well, let's talk about transparency. It's an amazing issue. And so there are different kinds of transparency, right? There's transparency about what models were trained on, right? There's transparent, and we have no transparency into that because the companies don't want to reveal it. Not speaking about Salesforce, but companies in general don't want to reveal it because they know they stole everything and they know they're going to get busted for copyright and they can delay it longer. That's my view of it, and I think that's probably conventional wisdom. So there's transparency about what models were trained on. There's transparency about what models do.
Yeah.
That's hard because we don't know what they do, right? Why don't we start with this? So, Sebastian, you were just talking about transparency into your agent actions, right? Admirable goal, I love it. How does it work, and how much transparency can you really get? Because, as, I don't know, DeepSeek just showed in their paper this week, and as Anthropic's been showing in paper after paper, we don't know how these models think, and if we try to figure it out, they lie to us, right? How do we get to transparency?
I think, so number one, being transparent about how the technology is itself has a certain level of opaqueness when you come at that element of the underlying model, certain different language models. And I think it's really impressive, the research and more of this honesty and transparency around technology is impactful, and we're all sort of trying to figure out, even so we've got our kind of top AI researchers, AI scientists. How exactly is all the sets working? The second point is, okay, well, what do you do with that, right? Look, some of it is, we think, fundamentals. Number one, you can be transparent with users that they're interacting with an AI system rather than humans.
Definitely.
And that is not to be trivialized. That is really important.
That is God's work. I'm just going to say that right there. I feel like that should be a fundamental principle that everybody should agree on. Thank you, Sebastian. Keep going.
Number two, when we think, I mentioned our Agent Force Command Center, we have different versions of it. It is possible to be completely aware and transparent around what is the AI agent doing vis-a-vis customers, or I've got Slack. We run Salesforce. We run our whole company on Slack. And so if I click on my agents sort of section, I've got a list of all the agents, right, that I use. Well,
are they wasting time in Slack, sending each other memes and stuff?
We try to drive productivity and efficiency and effectiveness, and also have a strong culture of fun and high performance.
Great. Keep going.
How they communicate. But on that it is possible, if you build the right technology, to know what are the agents saying, what are they doing, an element of how are they doing it, are they fitting within the guardrails. And then that, we have these dashboards. You could have it on analytics, right? And you have Tableau, we have Tableau Next. Just how you engage with these items, it is very possible if you choose to bring, those levels of transparency. You then have to be really tight on the guardrails, also an evolving element, and not to get overly technical, but some elements of the generative AI world, before we get to agentic AI, it's considered non-deterministic, right? Which basically means you can't guarantee that if you put in the same type of input, you will get the exact same output every time. It feels like an obvious point, but there are a lot of workflows and needs and tools and tasks that want deterministic outcomes. And so as we think of how the technology evolves in Agentforce, it's actually, we're going to deploy a hybrid of determinism and non-determinism to develop, right, the actual results that are needed, address the accuracy, the relevancy, have citations, but also really think through what is occurring, right, and why and how, and then being able to fix it. And look, the other element is, we think of agents and humans working together, 100%. Where the future is going and like what we're, kind of developing and, future outcomes, it's actually agents to agents to agents, and then humans, and all of these systems, right, sort of working, together. And so like in Slack, we can connect with other customers, entities, and whatnot through the channels, right? So there's that communication. Well, then you add, right, an agent to that, and they're going to have their agents, and what's the negotiation, right, look like? What's the oversight that then occurs, so that things aren't happening wholly, just again, without review and oversight, but also deciding what are the routine tasks. So you talk to workers and we do sort of analysis and think of ourselves as, employees and whatnot. What do people want? They want, more general skills training. They want AI training. They want to do less routine tasks, right? They want to have more impact. All of these things are items that we really ought to be, delivering. And then, you mentioned what is, I think of AI augmented workflows, and you redesign processes, and you're able to do all these sort of wonderful things. Well, what is an AI augmented, right, bad actor able to do now? As you said, we recently were just sort of grappling with this, what does AI empowered, right, phishing look like, or vishing, voice, or impersonations, right? So Nick, there are probably people at your company that are receiving WhatsApp or other messages that claim they're from you, right?
Almost
and
every
asking
hour.
you to do lots of sort of different things. So how do you educate people around that? How do you kind of help? And then
We're
you
all
think
asking
of
them to buy Salesforce contracts.
Nice.
No, it's Amazon
or
gift cards.
build their own agents.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing? I think the interesting bit, in addition to what you've said in transparency, is outcomes. So, and fairness of those outcomes. So another area we've looked at is personalized pricing. Now that is sort of brilliant economic, phenomenon. We all agree that sort of, there's a willingness to pay is at the basis of some parts of the economy. With personalized pricing, you can then decide who pays what to some degree, and there are rules around that, but then it's really interesting to see, will an AI-enabled system push that even further? And if we can't have the way to see the transparent outcomes, one, how do we really know that the new products have a beneficial outcome for consumers? And how do we look at the fairness between groups, making sure that it actually works out and we're not increasing societal problems?
And it's a nice one because it doesn't really apply to you because you're not a customer-facing company. But like, I could argue that with personalized pricing, what you should do is you should have like a regulatory regime and you should have transparency. And I could also argue and just say there'll be agents pushing people to different prices, but the consumers will have their agents too. And so actually what, consumer reports or consumer protection agencies should do is they should build agents that protect consumers against predatory pricing, and we should just let the market win. And if there's a company that prices unfairly, they'll get called out in the Atlantic, and eventually be a disadvantage for them.
If there was sufficient power for people to raise that is happening. That doesn't exist, and it's really difficult to know what's driving it. Right? It's not to unpick that is incredibly difficult. So you're starting to see uncovered unfairness, and consumers hate that. The consumers will that undermines your trust again if they feel that this is just not a fair system and it's taking advantage of me.
Let me push this sort of even further. So one, look, we seek to be customer zero for ourselves so that we are learning really fast. So, we have over 1 million conversations now with our own, customers, using Agentforce, and the like. And so we think, what do we learn from that? You have governments doing it. But to your point, so here's an area that antitrust authorities are going to, in the future, have to grapple with. So I think long-standing different countries, think about collusion and cartels in different ways, and price, and there's all these rules to make sure that it doesn't happen. Well, will there be agents, AI agents, that basically are working across companies to drive alignment on, prices.
Oh, that's
and collusion,
interesting.
right? These are
Yeah.
just sort of, if I put on my, kind of, not sort of professorial academic hat, but really these interesting, what are these emerging sets of issues?
Yeah.
That's, one of them. Now, you could also say, okay, that's interesting and important. Do you need, though, a new law or regulation to grapple with that?
Oh, you need a really good SEC bot to like figure it out.
To deal with, where you have insider trade. You could just imagine all these issues. And so it's like, how do you take laws, regulations, and frameworks to grapple with and have a future-oriented way?
Okay, at Salesforce, how do you make sure that your bots are not acting in anti-competitive ways, in ways like you could get in a lot of trouble if your bots do something illegal, right? If you've trained your agents, they've gone out, and Sebastian, you have 18 agents, I think you were saying, in your Slack channel, right? And your 18 agents like start colluding, and you can't really know what they're doing, and they do something illegal. How do you prevent that?
Well, our approach to that is our AI systems are really built with our customers.
Yeah.
So the customers are also, again, working with us as to what's their data governance, right? What are the guardrails that they need? How do they, when I think of, again, Agentforce Trusted Agentics, their choice, their control, their compliance, right? Where would they be on the level of the filters about what they want, the items to do, or not do? I'd also offer up, while we are incredibly bullish and excited about Agentforce and all our, 360 solutions and metadata and whatnot, our use cases are not exactly the ones that you outlined, just in terms of what our customers are expecting for us and the solutions that we're providing across our platform. But it has to come to guardrails, actions, and actually having limits on what the agents will do, and then having, whether it's AI agents themselves or auditability, trails, which enables actually better compliance and enforcement and the like, to monitor, are they going awry, right?
So let me give you a hypothetical that might happen, right? Okay, so I don't know whether the sales team reports to you, but imagine the sales team reports to you. Everybody on your sales team has agents. They're all out there trying to get customers. You want them all to build the best customers to bring in the most money. They train their agents to optimize for it. And one of the things that one of the agents for, salesperson A realizes, I just have to undermine salesperson B, right? And so suddenly you end up with like behaviors that you can't track, but that are really negative to the firm. How can you be made aware of that when it's happening inside of these models and with these bots where we barely know what they're thinking and it's very hard to trace what they do?
I think this is a powerful hypothetical, because if you recently look what Dario, so at Anthropic, right, put out around how their AI systems, if you give them the right information, just start to behave in ways that humanity has always grappled with, right? Machiavellian,
they're
right?
vending
These
machines,
types,
like
isn't it?
Evil, malicious vending machines.
It's
right?
fascinating,
Yeah.
right? So in our case, we would, hypothetically, as you sort of think about that, is actually being really tight on, are you monitoring how the agents are interacting with the customers? And look, it's been really amazing. We have discovered there were millions of leads, as it were. People had reached out to the company in prior years wanting to know more, and because you tier it and triage it, and I'm not sure if I'm exactly supposed to say it, we did nothing with those leads because we didn't have resources and whatnot. So we built an Agentforce, right, agent that now is able to actually tackle and respond to the people reaching out to us. And honestly, we then can compare what's the quality of that. And people may have negative feedback around issues. And candidly, I was just reviewing this recently. We do these regular AI Agentforce summits. The engagement, how that potential customer responded, I'll call it the empathy that our AI responded on these issues of, actually, I hear your concern. Here's the additional information that you received. That was a lot better than a lot of people experience when they're engaging solely with humans at other companies. So you have to watch it, you have to observe it, you have to monitor it and take seriously, right, what are the incentives that are being being created.
So we are almost at time. A reminder to everybody watching to share this on your favorite social media platform with SDIM25. Helena, you had the first word. Why don't you have the last word? What do you most want to see in AI in the next year? What is something practical that could happen either for companies or for regulators or for consumers that you think would help move us towards a better world where consumers are better protected and safer?
I would like all of our members who are consumer advocates all over the world to have access to better training for how to understand this and lean in to understanding what AI can do and how we shape it, because we are leaving this to a few, and we all need to be thinking about this and building forward. And that's especially true. You know, we haven't talked about 30% of the world is still not online. What are we building for them? It's going to be a very different set of capabilities. Let's make sure it's a better one.
Yeah. All right. That is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Thank you so much, Helena.
Thank you.
Thank you.